became fascinated by sand dunes, the irresistible way they moved,
Whatever
swallowing
your
roads,
Wanda
houses,
Maximoff
and on
did,
occasion entire
that blood is
towns.
not
He
on
saw
my
real drama in
hands.
the effort to
And
control
yet there
dunes
you
by planting
are,
hardy grasses
bathed in
instead of
red.
building
The
walls.
battle starts
The
in
article
5,
was never published,
4,
but Herbert was hooked,
3,
both on ecology and on
1.
sand. Around the same
All you
time,
need to do is
Frank
capture
became
the mission
obsessed with
area.
hero worship
Got it?
and its oftentimes disastrous effects
I've
on
made my
mankind.
share of
In
mistakes.
an article he wrote called
But I am
Dune
fighting
Genesis
every
about the
day to
inspiration
make
for
amends.
Dune, he explains, I conceived of a long novel, the whole trilogy as one book about the messianic convulsions that periodically bigots, demagogues, fanatics,
A nice deep
communists,
freeze.
the innocent, and
that's
the not so
good.
innocent, all were to have a part in the drama. This grows from my theory that superheroes are disasters of mankind. Even if we find a little hero, whatever or whoever that may be, eventually fallible mortals take over the power structure that always comes in such a It's here that these two vastly different subjects, Sand and heroes, became enmeshed in Frank's mind. He started worrying about ecology being the next frontier of the power crusade. We explicitly see this in the events of Dune. Fremen have a long-term community together on the rapids. This is their sacred project. And right from the ecologists and motivation before Paul arrives. When Paul shows up, he steps into the messianic role that the Bene Gesserit have already been prepping the Fremen for centuries. And so this ecological journey from terraforming Arrakis is fused with Paul's messianic identity. He becomes the figure who will lead them into promising, the one who will make the right. While reading Herbert's article about the mission, this line really stood out to me. He writes, our society operates on guilt. Herbert's actual point is that humans often feel guilty about injustice, environmental destruction, and inequality, and that this guilt can be easily weaponized. It's like the folks who call themselves social justice warriors. Even though I personally agree with them in fighting for it,
Armed and dangerous! Again!
Physiological drive for fighting for just cause. You feel like you're doing something, like the right thing. And that can be extremely dangerous. The insidious part is that the adrenaline high of enjoyment can become the actual point, more than solving the problem. In Dune Genesis, Frank Herbert also writes, this then is the plan don't deliver all of these critical factors out, no matter how aggravating beneath the hero's facade, we will find enormous problems arise. Paul's father, Leto, is a good man. I remember watching him in Dune Part 1, inspired by how much he cared for his men, including devastated when he died. This, Frank Herbert argues, can turn into a problem. It's not just bad leaders that are dangerous, but good ones too. Good leaders are dangerous because their goodness makes us want to surrender our individual judgment directly to them even more. They're so genuinely admirable that people around us stop thinking for themselves and follow them with dramatic rules. In Tim O'Reilly's biography of Frank Herbert, he writes, feudalism is a natural condition to which we fall, a situation in which some men and others surrendering their responsibility to make the decision. Duke Leto is generous, cold-hearted, and loves fiercely to all who follow him, even the enemies. A leader such as that would demand fanatic loyalty. He would be difficult to defeat. O'Reilly suggests that Herbert sees feudalism as a psychological tendency humans have naturally, and life is confusing and hard as a relief from letting someone else make decisions, especially if they're a good person. It's not only relief, but it feels like the right thing to do. But the deeper argument for the plain thing is the goodness of the leader is irrelevant to the because it feels justified to hand over power. It feels righteous. One of the biggest inspirations for Frank Herbert while writing Dune was Islam and Arabic culture.
Armed and dangerous!
Historian and sociologist. These influences are obvious, not just in the language of the Fremen, but in the events of the story. One quote that stood out to me while reading Tim O'Reilly's book on Frank Herbert was this one. In his research, Herbert had noted how the desert seems to be a wellspring of religion. The history of Judaism demonstrates that harsh conditions enjoy for enriching of anticipation. Islam, which we tend to associate more than any other faith with the desert climate, is perhaps the most messianic religion of all. Why does this happen? To understand it better, let's turn to the work of Islamic philosopher Ibn Khaldun. Khaldun was basically the first person to develop a scientific theory of how civilizations rise and fall. His theory is based on a concept called asabija, which basically means social
kind of
cohesion.
chaos.
This
How do you
cohesion
like
extends beyond his family or tribe to include a huge number of people. Khaldun argues that large movements or dynasties begin with a strong asabija that's built on things like
30
hardship
seconds before you
or
attack.
tribal/kinship ties. Take the United States of America, for instance. This country and the revolution that made it was built on top of immense asabija founded on irritations about taxation without representation. Then, as the state gains power and wealth accumulates, the ruling class becomes increasingly detached from its original base. This erodes asabija over time,
The battle
leading to the
starts in
fall of the
5,
civilization.
4,
And then the cycle
3,
repeats as
2,
new groups with strong
1.
asabija rise
All you
to
need to
replace
do is
the
capture
old
the
order.
mission area.
Khaldun
Got
studied
it?
this throughout his life, watching the cyclical nature of government in North Africa. He saw and studied how decadent ruling regimes were overthrown at regular intervals by tribal groups, and how over time, the new ruling regimes would reflect the depravity of the regime in this place. We see this in Dune with the decadence of the Romanans and the Empire. They've lost their social cohesion after years of being at the top of the pyramid. Then, the Fremen, who have immense social cohesion after centuries of hardship, replace them and end up killing 60 billion people in a holy war. The Fremen become just as bad, if not way worse, than their predecessors. Real quick, if you want to talk with me about movies, join my Sunday film club. We meet on the last Sunday of every month at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to talk about movies and become a subscriber to my Substack for $5 per month or $50 per year to get access to this cause. The link to sign up is in the top right corner here, as well as the description. It's here I want to highlight something Frank Herbert wrote that seems controversial on its face, but is actually really only the idea of the reaction next. In Dune Genesis, he writes, "I now believe that no society has ever achieved an absolute peace, that all humans are not created equal. In fact, I believe attempts to create some abstract equalization create a morass of injustices that rebound on the equalizer. Justice and equal opportunity are ideals we see, we should recognize that equality is the ideal, and that humans do not have equal ability." When he talks of inequality, he's actually talking about things like judgment, wisdom, and resistance to corruption. The gist of his argument is that when you try to design a perfect system, one that tries to provide equal outcomes from systems and institutions, that you introduce new injustices because those systems are run by humans who are anything but perfect. Humans have different judgment, wisdom, and resistance to corruption. Evolution, be it biological, social, or moral, never stops, which means any structure you build is already beginning to decay or transform the moment you finish it. The people who believe they've found the final answer, or the perfect system, or the ideal leader, those are the most dangerous people alive, because they'll enforce their answer on Speaking of adaptation, in Tim O'Reilly's biography of Frank Herbert, he writes, "An ecosystem is stable not because it is secure and protected, but because it contains enough diversity that certain organisms will survive despite drastic changes in the environment and other adverse conditions. Strength lies in adaptability, not fixing. Civilization, on the other hand, tries to create and maintain security, which all too frequently crystallizes into an effort to minimize diversity and stop change. In Dune Part 1, we see this philosophy reflected in the vision called As of Jameis, where he says, "The mystery of life isn't a problem to be solved, but a reality to experience. A process that cannot be understood by stopping it. We must move with the flow of the process. We must join it. We must flow with it." Frank Herbert believed that humans have a tendency to, in surrender themselves to a charismatic leader to more control. In Tim's book, he writes, "In Herbert's time, religion intended to hero adaptation and uncertainty. Those patient charismatic leaders experience deep comfort with security, meaning in the universe with moments is always one step behind." In Dune Genesis, Frank Herbert writes, "The verb to be does make it of us all. For example, you say X and Y, or things like this is the right system, or this is the truth. We're freezing a moving reality into a fixed belief. But when reality continues changing, those labels stay still, and then we fight and kill over those labels. The word is gives us false certainty about an infinitely uncertain universe. It's
I am ready to put on a show!
which is Alfred Korzybski's Alfred Korzybski the foundational idea of the map is not the
Nowhere yet.
basically
Going to overtime.
not the thing itself. For instance, it's not actually a true statement. The Earth revolves around the sun while rotating on its axis, thus giving the illusion that the sun is rising in the sky, but it's not actually doing it. The phrase encodes a completely false model of reality, one where the sun moves in the isolation state, and we use it every single day without thinking about it. Korzybski believed that the gap between the word and reality is where all conflict, confusion, misery originates. For example, if you believe a certain type of person is dangerous because of a label, you will perceive every individual from that group as dangerous. It's their personal experience.
Nowhere yet. Going to
Another example is how
overtime.
we react to words as if they were physical objects. If someone insults you, you are reacting to sound waves rather than the physical, harmless air pressure that actually hit your ear. It's absolutely fascinating when you dig into it, and Frank Herbert included this in Dune because of how influential language can be.
Another epic victory.
With the Bene Gesserits and The Voice, Frank's idea was that if language can shape thought in a way we're not even conscious of, then those who master language can bypass a person's rational mind and control them directly. Language obviously doesn't work exactly like it does for us, like the Bene Gesserits in Dune, but language does have unconscious effects on us in real life to the extent where we're controlled by it without even knowing it. The Bene Gesserit's entire manipulation
The right heroes could make all the difference.
You don't have to be a witch to find the magic in this world. But it does help.
Socrates' trial. You know, he was tried by the Athenians for corrupting, for failing to worship the correct gods and corrupting the youth of Athens by like teaching them stuff and asking them questions, you know, which is a great way to corrupt people. And so he knew the trial was coming.
You don't have to be a witch
And
to
Athens
find the
wasn't a very
magic
big
in
place.
this
It only had
world.
about 25,000
But it
people.
does.
Everybody knew
With
everybody.
both of our
Everybody knew who the
magics
powerful
together,
guys were. And
Stephen,
everybody,
our
including
foes.
Socrates, knew that
Stay strong.
the trial was a warning to like get out of town, right? So we're going to put you on trial in 6 months, and the potential penalty is death. Got that? It's like
We would be better off
so.
making a deal
So
with
Socrates had a
Mephisto.
chat with his compatriots, and they were contemplating fair means and foul to set up a defense for him, so that he could,
The
or to
battle
leave,
starts in
so that he
5,
could not be
4,
tried and put to death.
3,
And
2, 1.
he decided that he wasn't going to do that, and he also decided that he wasn't going to even think about his defense. And he said why. This is quite an interesting thing. He said why. He told one of his friends that he had this voice in his head, came in the spirit, something like that. That he always listened to, and that was one of the reasons he
need
was
to
different
teach
from
me
other
that
people.
spell,
He always
Stephen.
listened to this thing. It didn't tell him what to do, but it told him what not to do. It always told him what not to do. And if it told him not to do something, then he didn't do it. If he was speaking, and the little voice came up and said, no, then he shut up and he tried to say something else. And he was very chaotic about this, and he said that when he tried to plan to evade the trial, or even to mount his own defense, the voice came up and said, no, you must. Don't bother. What do you mean by that? Like, there's a trial coming and I'm going to be put to death. And, well, he eventually concluded that he was an old guy. You know, the next 10 years he was in his 70s. Perhaps the next 10 years it would be that great for him. He got a chance, maybe he got a chance just to bow out. You know? He was in fair prayers and whatever, to say goodbye to everyone, to avoid that last descent into catastrophe which comes into the philosopher, and to walk off the world on his own terms. Something like that. The point I'm making with that is Socrates attended to this internal voice and at least told him what not to do, and then he didn't do it. And of course, Socrates was a very remarkable man, and we still hear about him today, and we know that he existed in all of those things. And so, back to the walking with God idea. Now, as you elevate your aim,
When I said no more music,
you create a judge at the same time, right? Because the new ideal, which is an ideal you, even if it's just an ideal position that you might occupy, if it's still conceptualized in that concrete way, that becomes a judge. Because it's above you, right? And then you're terrified of it, maybe. That's why you make the decision when you go start a new job. This thing is above you and you're terrified of it, and it judges you. And that's useful because the judge that you're creating by formulating the idea tells you what's useless about yourself. And then you can dispense with that. And you want to keep doing that. And then every time you make a judge that's more elevated, then there's more useless you that has to be dispensed with. And then if you create an ultimate judge, which is what the archetypal imagination of humankind has done, say, with the figure of Christ, because Christ is nothing else, he is at least the archetypal perfect man and therefore the judge. You have a judge that says, get rid of everything about yourself that isn't perfect. Of course, that's also what God tells Abraham, right? He says, be perfect. To pick an ideal that's high enough, and you can do this. The thing that's interesting about this, I think, is you can do it more or less on your own terms. You have to have some collaboration from other people, but you don't have to pick an external ideal. You can pick an ideal that fulfills the role of ideal for you. You can say, okay, well, if things could be set up for me the way I need them to be, and if I could be who I needed to be, what would that look like? And you can figure that out for yourself, and then instantly you have a judge. And I also think that's part of the reason people don't do it. Why don't people look up and move ahead? And the answer is, well, you know, you start formulating an ideal, you formulate a judge, it's pretty easy to feel intimidated in the face of your own ideal. That's what happens to Cain versus Abel, for example. Then it's really easy to destroy the ideal instead of to try to pursue it, because then you get rid of the judge. But it's way better. Lower the damn judge if it's too much. Like if your current ambition is crushing you know, then maybe you're playing the tyrant to yourself, and you should cap down your ambitions, not get rid of them by any stretch of the imagination, but at least put them more reasonably within your grasp. You don't have to leap from point 1 to point 50 in one leap, right? You can do it incrementally. But I really like this idea. I think it's a profound idea that the process of recapitulating yourself continually is also the process of, it's a phoenix-like process, right? You're shedding all those elements of you that are no longer worthy of the pursuits that you're valuing. And then I would say the idea here is that as you do that, you shape yourself ever more precisely into something that can withstand the tragedy of life and that can act as a beacon to the world. That's the right way of thinking about it. Maybe first to your friends and then to your family. Like it's a hell of a fine ambition. And there's no reason that it can't happen. You know, every one of you knows people who are really bloody useful in a crisis, and people that you admire, right? Those are all, you can think of all those people as you admire as partial incarnations of the archetypal Messiah. That's exactly right. And the more that manifests itself in any given person, then the more generally useful and admirable that person is in a multitude of situations. And we don't know the limit to that. But people can be unbelievably good with it. It's really something to behold.
I need assistance. My life energy grows stronger.
You hear the egalitarian clarion
work here
calls
is-
everywhere. Everything should be equal. Everything should be equally distributed. We should strive for equity. Like, wrong. Especially if you're a conservative. Wrong. What we want are hierarchies of competence. Not everyone's a neurosurgeon. You know, if your father has a brain tumor, you probably want a hierarchy of competence for neurosurgeons, so you can pick the one that's the best, so that he might not die. That's what a hierarchy of competence is for. For the postmodernists, there's no hierarchy that isn't based on power. Well, because they think the world runs on power, and that's why they're willing to use power to get what they want, because it's the only thing they believe in. But a valid hierarchy of competence, God, we need those things, man. We need the best plumbers. We need the best contractors. We need the best. We need the best carpenters. We need the best lecturers. There has to be a hierarchy of quality. Not only so that we know who the best are and reward them properly, but so that we can reward them so they keep being the best. It's like, you have a great educator, you have a great leader. You have a great thinker. You want to reward them so they keep thinking and they keep educating, so they can tell you something. It's not a reward for their intrinsic being. It's a calculated move on your part. You suck everything out of them that's valuable as fast as you can. That's what a hierarchy of competence is for. And the idea that hierarchies of competence don't exist is so cynical. It's such a pathologically cynical idea. And it's actually quite patently untrue. Here's an interesting tidbit from the psychological literature. Let's say you want to define well, what do you hope? How about intelligence? There'll be a good one. Let's hope that smart people ROI more decisions of complexity. Right? Because they're smarter. Would you want it any other way? And that's great. The number one predictor of accomplishment in Western society is intelligence. So that means the system works. What's the number two predictor? Conscientiousness. So what's that? Trademark for hard work. So who gets ahead? Smart people who work hard. Now, that doesn't account for every bit of difference in terms of their hierarchy. Hierarchies are people get to the top sometimes because they're psychopathic, although believe me, a hell of a lot less than you think. Because a psychopath has to move from place to place. Once he reveals himself, he has to go find new suckers. So the idea is, there's no distinction between a CEO and a psychopath. But that's only made by someone who A, knows nothing about psychopathy, B, knows nothing about has something fundamental against the entire Catholic structure. Because it's simply not true. Corrupt, sometimes, greedy, sometimes short-sighted, sometimes running companies that are doing their best to auger themselves into the ground, and so, it's bad people running a dying organization. But generally speaking, it's not the case. Our hierarchies of competence are reasonably functional. And not only are they functional, they're valuable. We need to know who the competent people are, and we need to reward them. And even more importantly, we need to tell young people, hey, there's some hierarchies of competence out there. Like 1,000 of them. Go be a plumber, man. But be a good one, Be an honest one. I had a plumber once, It was the night before we were putting drywall in our house. We were redoing our house. He had put in all the plastic piping, and I was going to test the joints. They're supposed to be glued together with this pipe glue, right? And I told him I had to test the joints. And he said, well, you don't have to test my joints. They never leak. And I thought, yeah, that's okay. How about if I test them? So I went up on the 3rd floor and filled the pipes with water, capping them in the basement like
the
you're
right
supposed
heroes
to.
could make
like half an
all
hour
the
later, I had
difference.
2 inches of water in the basement. There were 30 leaking joints. And that was the night before the drywallers were supposed to show up. So he wasn't particularly competent. That's the point of that story. But even more so, he had put a bunch of plastic pipes outside,
no matter the cost,
where the drywall would be, so it would have been sticking through the wall. So I spent a frenetic night, sawing through plastic pipe and re-gluing joints so that the drywallers could come in. What's the point? If you're going to be a plumber, man, be a good plumber, because otherwise all you do is go out there and cause trouble. We don't need people to cause more trouble. We need people to solve problems. And so you can be a tradesman, and you can make a lot of money as a tradesperson. It's a bloody, reliable, honorable, forthright, productive way of making a living. And there is a hell of a lot of difference between a working man who knows what he's doing and one who doesn't, both in terms of skill and ethics, right? And you work with someone who knows what they're doing, it's a bloody pleasure. They tell you what they're going to do, they tell you how much it will cost, they go and do it, it works, and you pay them. Perfect. Everyone's
battle
happy.
starts in
And that's what
5,
happens when you have
4,
genuine hierarchy of
3,
competence. And so
2,
when you listen to these
1.
panderers of egalitarianism and equity, and they fail to recognize completely that there are differences in rank between people. It's not such a terrible thing, man. Maybe we would be a great voice. It's certainly possible. Most people are. That doesn't mean there's something we can say that. Lots of hierarchies. Sometimes you fail at one, go try at another.
I am
The
at
point
your
is, you're still trying to aim for the top. What the hell are you going to do if you don't try to aim for the top? Laugh about uselessly and whine about your life? It's not helpful. It'll just make you miserable. You're not reliable to anyone. You can't help out in a crisis. It's like you tell young I don't care what you're going to do, but go out there and make something of yourself, for God's sake. Be an honest person and work. Get to the top of whatever it is that you want to get to the top of. You know, and then stand up for yourself like a respectable human being. Be a bit of a light on the world, a bit of a light. You know, you can tell young people that, and they haven't been told that by anyone now. So young men are hungry for that, and it's painful to watch. They're so relieved when someone finally comes up and says, hey, you know, get your act together again. This is yourself, you can learn to tell the truth. Concentrate on something for a year or two, you could be a bloody world leader. Wow, that would be,
I abhor your
interesting.
mission, old
That might make life worth living. Like, yeah, it might. Why don't you do it? That's what the damn university is supposed to be teaching people. They've forgotten that. I went to Harvard a month and a half. Teach there. And I talked to a bunch of students, you know, and I told them, it's not easy to get Harvard, you know. It's like, you're a valedictorian. You're at Harvard. And not only are you a valedictorian, you're way better than most people at least 2 other things, or you don't get in. And so I get, I don't know what the 5%. Not everybody applies. It's a very low. These are high quality kids. So I told them what I just told you. It's like, here you are at Harvard, and you get yourself educated, man. Read the book, learn to talk, learn to think, make yourself independent. Get the hell out there, make the world that you're happy that you were put there in that great institution. You know, and they came up to me afterwards and said, God, I wish someone would have told us. We're in our first year. Like, Jesus, why didn't someone tell them that? For God's sake, it's supposed to be the greatest university in the world. It's so difficult to figure that out. Well, it is. That is what you're going to have happen to university. You want to be cringing meltdown. Pathetic.
I am at your service. The moon haunts you!
I am ready to put on a show.
Buddha finds his enlightenment under a tree. It's not fluke. That's the case. That's natural enlightenment. He's sitting in that lotus here. The lotus opens up. The sacred thing springs up from the depths. He sits there illuminated the same way. He's got a halo. He's got the sun that stands for higher consciousness. And he's transcended by accepting the fact that life is suffering. He's transcended the limitations. Part of mortality. See that symbol there? That swastika reversed. The Nazis reversed it. Well, think about it. I mean, they weren't stupid. The symbol is, their symbols have meaning. It's what the swastika represents. It's what this represents. Reverse. Well, that's a very bad idea. This is the thing that this idea is what enables people to transcend their suffering. And Buddha said, well, don't be too attached to things. What does that mean? It doesn't mean deny the world. It might mean deny the world if you're too in love with the material, like with material well-being, let's say, then your pathway to transcendence and meaning might be to abandon that because it's straining you, it's making you less than you could do. But the fundamental lesson, the more fundamental lesson that's underneath that is don't let what you are stop you from being what you could be. Right. And so then the question is, well, what do you identify with? You identify with what you are, then you're a tyrant. You identify with chaos, because that's the opposite of order. then you're nihilistic.
My soul shall
You don't identify with either of them. You know that they're both necessary. You know that you have to live with both, but you identify with the capacity to continually transcend what you are. And then you seek out error. That's what humility is. Like, I'm error-ridden. So I want to see, I want to put myself in a situation where I can discover one of my errors, hopefully not in a way that's going to knock me completely out of the game. I want to seek out a challenge. I want to find out where my limits are. I want to find out where there's not enough of me yet. And I want to do that in a way that's engaging, because you can wear yourself out fighting dragons, obviously. You can exhaust yourself completely. That's not helpful. One of the things I learned
Hurricane incoming! I am ready to put on a show!
flat out, there was always way more work that they could do. Very good. And they were exhausting themselves. And I said, well, you have to work less can't do that. And so what I learned over time was, okay, so this is what you have to do. Every 3 months you have to walk off 4 days and go have a vacation. Plan that in advance so it's in your calendar so that your secretary doesn't book your times. And then you need that because you have to recuperate enough so that you can work as hard as you're going to work. And of course they were nervous about that. I said, well, look, we can calibrate this. Let's keep track of your billable hours over the next year and see if they increase or decrease. Because I bet you if you take more time off, you'll actually have more billable hours. You'll actually have your cake and eat it too. You'll get to have a vacation and you'll be more productive.
He stopped them in their tracks.
And inevitably that was what happened. And so that's a matter of calibrating the game properly, right? You want to play a game that you can play today, but also one that you can play next week and next month. We're not talking about, your career this week. We're talking about you having a career that lasts 30 years, that doesn't kill you, that doesn't make you hate yourself or the job, that doesn't make you bitter, that doesn't wear you to a frazzle. So it has to be optimized. And so I think that you can, in fact, decide to take on the load that's optimally meaningful if you want, and then you get to have your cake and eat it too. You're on the pathway to continual incremental improvement. You only have to burn off a feather at a time instead of having the whole bloody thing burst into flames. But it's a constant source of renewal. And there's an idea that to be renewed, you have to drink the water of life, right? That's an old mythological idea. And what's the water? The water of life, chaos is water. Water is chaos. Water is what washes away too much order. And to stay continually, let's say, refreshed by the water of life is to take on exactly the right amount of chaos to make sure that your garden is properly nourished. And I think meaning is actually the marker of that. And as I said, you know that I wouldn't consider myself either naive or a particularly optimistic person. I don't think I'm either of those. But this is actually an idea, this is one of the only ideas that I've ever found that I really believe to be rock solid. I actually think that it's true. And it's very optimistic because it says you can use your sense of meaning to calibrate your progress through life. But there's rules. You have to aim at the highest possible good that you can conceive. Now, and that's subject to update, because what the hell do you know? But you start by aiming at the star you can see rather than the dimmer one that you can't yet perceive. And then you decide that you're going to do that honestly, right? That's a big decision. So the first decision, I think, in some sense, is a decision of love. You're going to decide that being is worthwhile and that you're going to work for its betterment. And that's a decision that's based on love. And the second decision is based on truth. Having made that decision, you're going to play a straight game. Having made those two decisions, I think that you can allow your sense of meaning to calibrate your pathway. And then what's so interesting is that you hit a state that's as close to paradisal as you're going to hit right away, because being engaged like that, it's better to be engaged in the solution of a complex problem than not to have a problem at all. And that's no different than saying it's better for there to be being than non-being, because being is a problem. And so if you want to have no problems, then you have no being. And you could say, well, being is so miserable that maybe that's the route we should take. Fair enough, but maybe you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have the damn problem. It can be a problem worth solving, and you can be so engaged in solving the problem that it justifies the fact that the problem exists. And then you get to have you get to have the problem and the solution at the same time, and maybe that's better than not having the problem at all. And I believe that because one of the things I have seen, and I've seen this so interesting, been so interesting when I've been lecturing to people, especially more recently, and this is also manifested on itself on YouTube. I'm talking to people a lot about responsibility, and it's young men in particular that seem to be responding to that. And I think that's partly because I think that young women, in some sense, have their responsibility map already laid out for them. It's also less voluntary in some sense for women because they have more complicated problems to solve in the first part of their life, right? Because they have to get the family problem solved. But whatever, I've been talking in a very delineated manner about responsibility, which is a strange thing to sell to people, but responsibility is what gives your life meaning. And so then you might say, well, then take on ultimate responsibility. And what happens? You have an ultimately meaningful life. And then you might say, well, if your life is ultimately meaningful, it doesn't matter if it's punctuated by tragedy or even predicated on tragedy. It's worth it.
2, 1.
And I think that's true. And everything I've seen indicates to me that's true. Every time I get my clients to take on more responsibility, you know, and it isn't an injunction. You're a bad person, you should take on responsibility. It has nothing to do with that. You can define the damn responsibility. It isn't something that someone else should impose on you. It's not a matter of doing what you should do in some abstract manner. It's not that. It's the choice of what game you're going to play. And, you know, you can play the game of the seeker, I would say, and if you play that game, then everyone wins. And it's the best game you can play. And so the answer, in some sense, to the tragedy of life, to the fall, is to adopt the responsibility of mortality that goes along with that, and to play that game maximally. And paradoxically, it's in the willingness to do that that the solution emerges.
Those are bad guys.
This is a story that the ancient Egyptians predicated their society. And to understand this story, the first thing you have to know is what the characters were. And these characters were gods. There's 4 of them. Although the Egyptians had far more than 4 gods. You might think of these as the central gods. And you might think, what is a central god? And then you might think, well, imagine that the gods compete for dominance across time.
But they will have to wait for now.
And some gods win, and they occupy the primary position of dominance in the hierarchy, in the dominance hierarchy of gods. And those are ideals, and ideals compete across time for dominance, and they're embodied. And so when diverse tribal peoples come together, they throw all their gods into the ring, and they fight across time, and something emerges as a victory. And that's the emergence of monotheism out of polytheism. And it parallels the development of a unified morality within each of us as we develop across time. And the god that emerges as dominant across time bears a substantial resemblance. Imagine you have a set of gods in this locale that are competing across time and something emerges as dominant. And then over here you have another set of gods that compete across time for dominance and something emerges. You'll see major commonalities across the two things that emerge. The reason for that is because the process of emergence that gives rise to both of them is similar in both situations. And that's part of what accounts for the cross-cultural similarity of high-order religious ideals. All right, anyway, you need to know the characters. Osiris. Osiris is the old king. He's Dumbledore for all intents and purposes. He's the old king. He's the spirit that established the Egyptian state when he was young. He was a great hero, but now he's old. And he's archaic and he's willfully blind. That's Osiris. He has a brother, Seth. Seth is Seth. Seth is Satan, because the word Satan comes from the word Seth, and Seth via the Coptic Christian. So he's a precursor to the Western idea of Satan. You have Isis. Isis is queen of the underworld, and Isis was the goddess of a religious structure that prevailed across thousands and thousands of years. Isis. and you have Horus. Horus is a falcon,
For extermination.
and the Egyptian eye. Everyone knows that, right? The eye open.
A pretty good
That's Horus. And Horus is a falcon because falcons can see way better. They can see better than us. They can see better than anything else except for perhaps eagles. And they fly above everything. Zazu in Lion King is Horus. Right? And Mufasa is Osiris. And Scar is Seth. And there's no specific representation of Isis, but the closest there is in that story is probably the Queen of the Hyenas, played by yes, Whoopi Goldberg. That's right. Because they inhabit. She's like the queen of the underworld, right? Queen of the hyenas that live out among the dead. But, okay. Anyway, Seth,
Don't turn back now.
Osiris, Seth, Isis, and Horus. Here's how the story goes.
I require some aid.
Osiris is a great king. He established the Egyptian state. You can think about him as the embodiment of Egyptian custom and tradition. You can think about him as the thing that the pyramid represents. All right, but he was great when he was young, but he's not young anymore. He's old, and he's willfully blind. And what that means is that he doesn't see what he could see. He refuses to see what he could see. Why is Osiris old and willfully blind? Because that's what culture is. It's a paternal spirit that's old and willfully blind, and it's always that way. Always that way. And the reason for that is because it's the construction of the dead. The dead aren't alive. They can't, so they're out of date. They can't update themselves anymore. And you inhabit their corpse. And that's actually what happens in the earlier story that I'll tell you next week. The early Mesopotamian gods inhabited the corpse of their father, roughly speaking. Anyway, so Osiris was great and when he was young, but he isn't young anymore. He's old and he's willfully blind. He won't look where he knows he should look. He doesn't have the energy, or maybe he doesn't have the spirit. His brother Seth is not a good guy. And Osiris knows it, but he underestimates his malevolence and power. And so Seth wants to rule the kingdom. So what does that mean? It's easy. Every stable society is threatened by willful blindness and malevolence. Always. Every bureaucracy has that proclivity to stagnate and to become blind. That's why corporations die. That's why Fortune 500 company only lasts 30 years. It's why we have to have elections to stop the dead from staying in control for too long. Osiris turns a blind eye to Seth. Seth is happy. Seth is happy. The lion, roughly speaking. Seth one day waits for Osiris to make a mistake and armed and chops him out of pieces. And he distributes the pieces across the entire Egyptian state. In fact, the Egyptians regarded their provinces as pieces of Osiris's body. Okay, so now you can't kill Osiris because he's a god. Why is he God? A god because he represents the spirit of structure. And there's always structure. It can't be destroyed. It always reconstitutes. It can be hurt and broken into pieces, which is exactly what happened to Osiris. Things fall apart. Why? Because they get old and because malevolence undermines them. That's what the Egyptians were trying to sort out. Okay, so Seth distributes his Osiris all over Egypt so he can't get himself back together. Things fall apart and they can't be brought back together. But the spirit of Osiris still lives in the pieces. So what happens? Order is demolished. What would you expect? Chaos emerges. That's Isis. Isis is queen of the underworld. She's Osiris's wife. Order and chaos, just like the yin and the yang. Order collapses, up comes the queen of the underworld. She's looking for order. Chaos cries out for order. She's looking for order. She goes all around Egypt trying to put Osiris back together. It's a state of chaos. She finds his phallus. She makes herself pregnant with it. And what does that mean? Well, it means it's like Geppetto in the belly of the whale. That thing has the potential to reemerge. The thing that collapses into its pieces is still alive. It can unite with the chaos and produce something new. That's the story of the dissolution of structure into chaos and then its revivification. Isis makes herself pregnant and goes back down to the underworld to give birth to Horus.
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
The son of the Great Father and the Great Mother. He's a messianic figure. And in fact, much of the mythology that describes Horus was extracted without much modification and then attributed to Christ. Very much, and you can read about the parallels.
Again!
There's any number of parallels. Of course, there is the mythology that the Jews came out of Egypt, and of course the Christians came out from the Jews. So there was a tremendous influence of Egyptian thinking on the development of these later ideas. And you see pictures of Isis with Horus on her lap that are virtually identical in content and form to the later pictures of Mary with the infant Christ. And that's the Holy Mother of God in the hero. It's not a Christian motif. It's far deeper than a Christian motif. It's a human